Eileen said it well. It seems that we want to do it first and study it later. And the congressional study won't be ready for draft, the draft of it won't be ready for public and peer review until 2014. This New York Times article that was referenced, the University of Pennsylvania's Center of Excellence in Environmental Toxicology, that is just now getting underway. The fact is that if the science was clear about the safety of this energy production, these studies would not be taking place. If the science was clear, then why would we need further study? And the fact is that New York has had a moratorium for 4 years because they are unconvinced about the safety. Maryland has refused to allow it until it can be proven safe. And we are going gangbusters, full steam ahead on a technology that we cannot be assured is safe. And with all due respect to my colleagues on the panel, to equate solar and wind with this fracking is absolutely And I also believe, with all due respect, that the industry's claim and the claim of others that we've been doing this for decades and have had no problems, that is simply not true. This new technology that has allowed us to drill deeper and fracture and get a hold of this natural gas is relatively new and certainly new in northeastern Pennsylvania.
Would anybody else like to respond to that question?
Yeah, I would just like to add to that, kind of mention, well, talk about what Phyllis is saying here. What is new, and I mentioned this earlier, is the actual precision of the horizontal drilling process. Hydraulic fracturing has been used in this state for decades. It's nothing new. Bill mentioned there are wells in western Pennsylvania that have been online for decades. The process, the thing that is new here is actually how precise the industry can get. So we're talking about a technological advancement. And the other thing that I would point out is that it's really the industry that is helping enhance the science and understanding of the environment in the region. And we as a company have collected roughly 20,000 pre-drill water tests, data points in the northern PA area, and of those tests we found that more than 25% of them already have methane presence in them. A very high percentage also have manganese, arsenic, iron. All of these contaminants are naturally there, and it's because of the industry's presence and activity and interest that we're finally talking about these and focusing on them.
Thank you. I think we'll move on at this time to question number 5. Given the uncertainty and the potential risks of this industry, how does one weigh the short and long-term benefits of the natural gas extraction? And we'll start this with Marlene Troy.
I think this kind of summarizes what some of the discussions has been going on this evening, is that how does all this fit together? How can we make these decisions about longer-term, short-term benefits if we don't know what that long-term or big picture is? And I think I was surprised when I was doing some background research for tonight that we do not even have an energy policy. How does all this fit together? Do we have goals for the future? Where do we see ourselves? How are we going to balance these different challenges that we have? Also, we're seeing we need funding for this money. We need funding for these initiatives. How are we going to get it? Do we have things that exist now? Can we form partnerships? Can we have perhaps public-private partnerships that can work on these problems and come up with situations where we can come up with these, to get the funding to do these studies? one of the challenges is if you need the funding, you know, can you accept money from a gas company and then have your data questioned? So how do we collectively do this and think about the big picture? These are challenges we have to face. We're all here tonight, the weather is very interesting. Is that related to this discussion tonight? Well, is it part of the bigger discussion about climate change? And climate change, very much a component, is where we're getting our energy and thinking about the future. What are we going to do about it? So long-term, short-term, I think it drives the point that we definitely need more discussions about getting an energy policy, seeing how the different components, is gas going to solve everything? No. Is there potential place for it? Maybe yes, substituting for coal when we make electricity. But can we balance both the renewable and these other options going forward and coming up with a plan, coming up with some goals so we can get where we want to be and answer these questions as well?
Thank you. I'd also like Bernard Prusek to respond to question number 5, please.
Thanks. I want to reiterate my initial comment. I think there are 2 questions that the public needs to know to ask. So just to begin with, again, whether the actors have done enough to dispel the uncertainty over whether fracking poses morally significant risks. Now, if it is the case that we want to do it first and study it later, then the answer's got to be no, and fracking then can't be justifiable. I want to quote Dr. Klimov. We have a lot that we don't know. There is really a lot that we do not know, and there are a lot of valid concerns. Now, just to focus a little bit on the question that was put to me is, given the uncertainty and the potential risk of this industry, how do we weigh the benefits? We've got to think first, well, how deep does the uncertainty go, and what exactly are we uncertain about? When we talk about the potential risks, what are the risks we're talking about? Are these serious risks to human health? Are these serious risks to, let's say, children? If so, then I'd say that the industry and government really have a very high threshold, again, to meet before fracking could be considered to be morally justifiable. I think that's a point worth reiterating. Very complicated questions, though. We've talked about the need for energy policy and the fact that, as Dr. Klimov put it, we don't know a lot about solar and wind and nuclear energy as well. And there are risks from these two. An important question to consider then, once more, is what sorts of risks we're talking about. So we could acknowledge risks from solar and wind. Are these comparable risks that we'd be talking about when it comes to fracking? So we would need clarification on that point, certainly. The second question, again, to reiterate, I think the public needs to know to ask is whether, if there is uncertainty here, and I think there is. I've done a lot of reading. I'm not a scientist, but I've done a lot of reading. I've done a lot of listening to this panel too, hearing a bit of uncertainty. If there is uncertainty about fracking, could we point to moral considerations, substantial moral considerations, in its favor that would justify going ahead? Again, I'll go back to my case of Jill and whether to blow up the house. If she's got moral considerations on her side, she should go ahead. Much more realistic examples would come from war. So sometimes in war, soldiers have to operate in conditions of uncertainty. The question is whether they have substantial moral considerations that would license going ahead and taking a risk that might lead to the death of many innocent persons, let's say. Now, we could point to reduction in carbon and say that could well count as a substantial moral consideration in fracking's favor. We could also perhaps point to geopolitical consequences if, through the exploitation of natural gas, the United States became more energy independent, and perhaps that would have significant political consequences for our relationships with Saudi Arabia and the Middle East more generally. That case, though, has to be made. And so far, I don't know that I've heard it made, quite honestly. So what are the substantial moral considerations that, in conditions of uncertainty, would license our going ahead and running significant moral risks? If the moral risks really are significant to human health and the environment, and if there is uncertainty about these moral risks, then the advocates of fracking, governments and industry, need to point to substantial moral considerations that would justify going ahead. If they don't, they're not making good ethical argument.
Phyllis, I also have you listed to respond to question number 5. You want to respond to that question?
Oh, sorry. I missed that. I think that's the question. That is the question. How do you weigh the benefits when you don't know what the short and long-term risks really are, because there is not enough good science that lets you know that. Yes, some landowners are reaping enormous benefits. Some new jobs are being created. Natural gas prices are good. Natural gas burns cleaner than coal. But the truth is that we just do not know, and we are not adequately preparing for the short and long-term risks to the environment and to the public health and safety of this new industrial activity.
Anyone else like to respond to that on the panel? No?
I would like to reiterate once again that this term, long-term impacts, short and long-term impacts, define them. Oftentimes they're thrown out as, what are the 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years? Well, we have 10, 20, 30, 50, and 100 years worth of drilling and hydraulic fracturing in this country. And you made a comment before about how we're drilling deeper. That's actually not the case. The Marcellus Shale is only about 6,000 feet down. You can go down to the Gulf and down to other parts of the world, and we're drilling 10,000, 20,000 feet down. So the technology has existed for us to go down to deeper formations to pull this gas up. The issue is we're focusing on a shale that has not been viable because we didn't have the technology, the computer, the understanding, the price behind it, and the cost. So again, we go back to this notion that what are the long-term benefits or the risks and everything along those lines, and it's been around for so long now. And we have things that we're looking at, carbon reductions, the economics. Montrose, Susquehanna County has a new hospital. A hospital that it's been using for 60, 70 years now is outdated. It's not big enough to accommodate the area, and people have to go almost an hour away to get any quality medical care. Now, because of the industry, there's a brand new hospital that can facilitate any sort of medical care that the industry needs.
It's not built yet. It's not there. It's a mound of dirt.
Would you hold your comments, please? You can talk afterwards.
Another point often debated is the ancillary effects of the economy. Adam Diaz, for instance, is a 35-year-old entrepreneur up in Susquehanna County who went to school for graphic design. And if you're familiar with Susquehanna County, there isn't much need for graphic designers. So he ended up going back into bluestone quarrying, and when the industry came into town, he saw that as an opportunity to expand. And what he did was he started delivering the garbage containers on site. And then he started delivering the crushed stone. And then he started buying the trucks and eventually a quarry to bring the stone. So now he's fully integrated. He eventually moved on to drilling the first 100 feet of our wells. He realized that the industry could be more efficient if it had a new mechanism to accomplish that. But perhaps the most interesting part of his story is the cabinet manufacturing plant that he bought that went out of business, and with it 30 jobs. Adam bought that, reinvested money into it so that it could compete in the cabinet manufacturing market, and now there's 30 people with health insurance, with extra money in their pockets so their kids can go to school and have a good time. And that's a direct impact from natural gas, and that's a sustainable impact from natural gas, because that is a product that's not dependent upon natural gas, but yet there's people directly benefiting from it. And this is just one example of the many that I can give. and I'm just going to pass this whole on to somebody else now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to question number 6, the last question now. In what ways has the discussion changed concerning Marcellus Shale exploration? How can local residents, students, and others remain sufficiently informed and participate in the public discussion about this industry? And we'll start the response with Ken Klingel.
Okay. So I guess the answer to this, how has the discussion changed? And I guess the answer depends upon your time frame. And so, if you go back to 2005, 2006, how many of us even knew about Marcellus Shale? How many cared about Marcellus Shale? How many people cared about hydrofracking? And the answer is not many. We were worried about other things back in 2005, 2006. If you fast forward to 2008, 2009, when hydrofracking first came on board, one of the things that I saw, and again, I'm interested in science, but I'm also very interested in the public understanding of science and trying to see if we can raise scientific literacy and use science for better decision making. And one of the things that I saw, and maybe I was sensitized to this because, again, of the experiences that I went through on this wind farm project back in 2005, 2006, is how quickly people developed an opinion on this. You had industry that very quickly developed, and they got very defensive, and they were very, well, first of all, they were very proud about what they did, but then they were very defensive about criticism that came their way. And on the other hand, there was an opposition that developed very quickly to this issue, and this opposition really took they didn't spare any negative comments against industry. So what we had then was this really divisive, nasty, personal argument that developed between industry proponents and industry opponents. And so, again, as I saw this happen 2008, 2009, maybe 2010. And so what I see, and I think this is typified by what we're seeing tonight in this audience, is that this division still occurs. That we have proponents of gas development, industry, and other people who are benefiting, but also people who might be free market advocates and just people who don't like environmental regulation. So we have people who just think, let's let the gas industry proceed with either unfettered or just with what the DEP is doing now. On the other hand, we have people who are bitterly opposed to gas development, and it's really to a large extent the same people who were bitterly opposed a few years ago. And so the thing that I see interesting happening, though, as my position as a scientist, is that one of the things that I'm seeing happen in this discussion is that people are now actually paying attention to the science. Unlike what might have happened maybe 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of the discussion that we have now are people arguing about scientific articles. And from my perspective, this is great. That we're arguing science. People are going and reading the Graffian and Howard articles, and they're reading the Cathos articles, and they're reading, they all know who, some of the Duke researchers are. And so this is really wonderful, but the thing that I see, though, is that there's a lot of misuse of the science. And people are taking the science, and they're twisting it, they're cherry-picking it to suit their own purpose. And we have to stop doing that. We have to be open-minded. We're all in this together. We have tough choices as a society, and we can't go just simply pointing fingers and insulting people and clapping for one group of people and clapping for another group of people. We have to engage in thoughtful, productive discussion, and we need to find some way of getting consensus. So maybe if we fast forward the discussion, what I'd like to see 3 years from now, 5 years from now, are the opponents and the proponents getting together and finding ways to be able to, be able to come to a rational decision on this, and not just have this bitter back and forth that's going on.